Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. At the end of the first season of Andor, Cassian joins forces with Luthen Rael and fully commits to bringing down the Empire, no matter what the cost. That is basically what the entire first season of the show is about. Sure, we get to meet some very interesting and colorful characters like Kino, Floy, and Brasso, and Cyril's mom. We get to witness some very important events like the riot on Ferrix, the raid on Aldhani, and the breakout at Narkina 5. But ultimately, this is all about how an individual goes from being a lowly thief to a full-blown revolutionary, and how the Empire's increasingly draconian security measures pushes a relatively self-serving individual to make the ultimate sacrifice. Now, in Season 2, with Andor's journey to the Rebellion complete, he must now take part in a very complicated process of uniting dozens of different insurgent and rebel factions who are all individually fighting the Empire in their own way. It will take a great deal of compromise, strong leadership, and ultimately an increasingly hostile and dangerous Empire that will unite this coalition and turn them into a real fighting force. Today we'll be taking a look at the various organizations and small military units that make up the larger alliance to restore the Republic, along with a few smaller groups that aren't even officially tied to the group but could potentially help Andor. Credit must go where credit is due. Without Bail Organa's quick thinking during Order 66, Grandmaster Yoda most likely would have had a much more difficult time escaping Coruscant. And in many ways, that short meeting that Bail holds on his ship between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda can be considered the first true attempt to start an insurgency against Palpatine's power. In the following years, Organa would use his diplomatic privileges and refugee aid programs to cover for a pretty complex operation to lay the foundations of a wider rebel movement. This involved recruiting like-minded individuals that could be trusted to carry out various operations, and also specialists, soldiers, pilots, spies. Bail also established a network of informants with secret agents known as Fulcrum. They would play a huge role in informing the rebellion of the Empire's actions and goals. Many of the first members of Bail Organa's resistance actually came from his own household guard and the Alderaanian diplomatic corps. Most of the rebellion's first ship were also from the Alderaanian fleet. Bail Organa was also depositing ships, weapons, resources on various so-called rebel safe worlds all across the galaxy that would be used later on when the Galactic Civil War finally ignites. As the Imperial Senate lost more and more power, Bail Organa would step down from his Senate position, and his daughter, Princess Leia Doublebuns, would replace him. For the rest of his life, Bail Organa would basically focus on preparing for the Galactic Civil War. Later on, he would tragically die in that massive mining accident that destroyed Alderaan. Even though a lot of the, vehicles, troops, and weapons he gathered on Alderaan were all destroyed, like any good leader, he made sure that even if he dies, the movement can continue without him and continue to grow. And that's exactly what he did. It is very possible that Andor might run into Bail Organa, or at least, members of his resistance group in the second season, especially later on when we get to Yavin. So the Massassi group was essentially the rebellion's first battle group, smaller than the fleet, but large enough to carry out tactical operations against the Empire. The Massassi group was basically one of the first regular rebel units. At the core of this group was General Jando Dana, a former bridge officer on a Venator-class Star Destroyer for the Republic during the Clone Wars, and then luckily for the Rebellion, he actually became one of the first captains of the newly designed Imperial-class Star Destroyer line, right before he defected to the Rebellion. As an individual with intimate knowledge of the Imperial fleet, down to the schematics of their individual ships and how they operate and all of their weaknesses and doctrine, Jando Dana was in the perfect place to build a military force to counter the Imperial Navy. And in hindsight, the tactics the Rebellion used, the mix of corvettes and blockade runners that made up the core of their fleet, was a perfect counter to the much slower and heavily armed Imperial fleet. General Dodonna would be joined with other like-minded individuals like Antok Merrick and Garvin Dries, two former Planetary Defense Force pilots who would develop the Rebel Alliance's Starfighter Corps. And so during Andor Season 2, the Massassi group is by far the largest, most disciplined, best trained, and well-armed rebel units. It should be noted that despite their strength, the Massassi group's main goal is to stay alive and not get destroyed by the Empire. Think of it almost as a headquarters unit designed to protect the most important figures in the rebellion. It's almost fitting that shortly after engaging the Battle of Scarif and Yavin 4, the Massassi group would be disbanded, thus ending the early alliance to restore the Republic period and ushering in the true Rebel Alliance period. So the Massassi group was dedicated to protecting the leaders of the rebellion, but you also had these individual rebel cells that were spread all across the galaxy, usually assigned to a specific sector, and these are the actual units that were harassing Imperial supply lines and attacking bases. These small units usually went up against an entire Imperial sector fleet made up of at least a half a dozen Imperial-class Star Destroyers. The rebellion lacked, ships of the line that could actually stand up against an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, so they mostly relied on hit-and-run tactics. Phoenix Cell is one of the most effective rebel cells during this period. It was active as early as 4 BBY, and they were assigned to the strategically important Lothal system. Lothal is home to many important minerals and natural resource extraction sites necessary for the Imperial military-industrial complex. The planet also hosts a sizable Cinar Fleet Systems operation. Lothal was further away from the core regions and therefore an easier target to strike for the rebels. Phoenix Cell, thanks to its elite Spectre unit, would tie up a huge amount of Imperial resources on Lothal and prove to be a huge headache for the local garrison. The Empire would actually send all of their top leaders in a desperate attempt to quash Phoenix Cell. This included Moff Wilhelm Tarkin, Colonel Wolf Yularen, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and even Darth Vader at one point. The Spectres were able to successfully liberate Lothal from Imperial control in 1 BBY. They also did a significant amount of damage to Thrawn's 7th Fleet and managed to banish the Chiss Admiral to another galaxy. It was one of the first major victories for the rebellion at the sector level, and although it wasn't as visible as the destruction of the Death Star, it did show the galaxy and the Empire that the rebellion was a force to be reckoned with and that they could actually win. Now, Phoenix Cell should be operating in the background of Andor Season 2, but I think we should have some, at least references of them, because they're at the height of their activity basically in the second season of the show. Major events that they were involved in, like the Battle of Antolon and the escape of Mon Mothma, both of which occurred in 2 BBY, would have been known to the wider rebellion, along with, of course, the liberation of Lothal. It should be noted that in some of the trailer shots, we actually see a location with fields of wheat that kind of reminds me of Lothal, so it is possible that we will be returning there in some way, especially because there's another scene of Andor stealing a state-of-the-art TIE fighter, most likely from a Cinar Fleet Systems factory. As we mentioned, there is a sizable Cinar Fleet Systems presence on this planet, including a factory for experimental fighters. So the units we've talked about so far are a part of the official alliance to restore the Republic, as in they fall into, I guess, the military chain of command that is established in that unit. What I want to talk about next are, these various insurgent groups that have kind of joined forces with the Alliance to restore the Republic, but still have their own independent command chain. Prior to the Battle of Scarif, many of these bands of fighters and individual fleets that made up the Alliance to restore the Republic were given maximum autonomy. This was pretty normal. And so the leaders of these individual groups could actually choose what missions they wanted to go on and refuse to do things when they felt like it was detrimental to their unit, which of course is not a good way to run a military force. It's way too chaotic. As we see during the raid on Scarif, Mon Mothma actually had no real power to command all of the various forces to support Jyn Erso's team. Now, one of the more important groups to join the Alliance to restore the Republic were a group of Mon Calamari Planetary Defense Force fighters under the command of Admiral Raddus. Mon Cala had been occupied in 18 BBY by Imperial forces, and Admiral Raddus's men had fought in a successful underwater campaign against the invaders. Raddus was able to convert many of the large underwater cities his people used as civic buildings into warships, and on these ships, he was able to evacuate many Mon Calamari from the planet. Raddus's MC-75 Star Cruiser was the largest ship the Alliance to restore the Republic had available. The Mon Calamari were known as excellent shipbuilders and also excellent sailors and explorers, and so they were really crucial in establishing the early rebel fleet. Admiral Raddus would perish at the Battle of Scarif when his ship was boarded by Darth Vader, although thanks to him, the rebel fleet was able to hold out long enough to retrieve the Death Star planes. In the months following the Battle of Yavin, the Mon Calamari mercantile fleet would basically defect to the rebellion along with one of their captains, Gal Akbar. He would bring with him several MC-80 cruisers, which would make up the backbone of the Rebel Navy. It's possible that Andor will interact with the Mon Calamari at the Rebel base on Yavin 4 in some way. The Axis network might be one of the most important parts of the rebellion that most Star Wars fans haven't heard of. Unless they've seen the first season of Andor, that is. The Axis Network was an intelligence unit led by Luthen Rael, and its main purpose was to kick the rebellion into high gear. The goal here was to goad the Empire into cracking down brutally on the civilian populace. Luthen Rael hoped that when that happened, more and more individuals would join their ranks. Luthen Rael also had connections to various insurgent groups like Saw Gerrera's Partisans and Anton Krieger's Insurgents. He sought to influence them so that they would work with one another towards a common goal. of destroying the Empire. Although one could argue that the methods used by the Axis network were quite brutal and a bit shady, Luthen Rael was exactly what the rebellion and the galaxy needed. Without him, a proper resistance might have never formed. Without him, Cassian Andor would have stayed on Ferrix. Saw Gerrera's partisans have been engaged against the Empire since basically the day the Republic collapsed. This unit was originally created on Saw's homeworld of Andor. The rebel leader had fought against the separatist occupation of his planet and would rebel against the Empire after the Clone Wars ended. Basically, the Imperial military tried to force Saw's men to sign up to the Imperial military, and they refused. Trained by the Jedi in Republic Special Forces, Saw was an expert in asymmetrical warfare, and for almost 2 decades he would launch raids against Imperial facilities and their logistical network. Often butting heads with Mon Mothma and the main rebel factions, Saw's partisans were obsessed with inflicting damage against the Imperial military. And while they were often successful in their raids, they never really achieved anything more than small tactical victories. We definitely will be seeing more of the partisans in Andor, and I believe that they play a role in the Gorman massacre, which started out as a peaceful protest but ended in a bloodbath after an IED was just randomly detonated in the crowd. One of the main reasons why I believe Saw Gerrera's partisans could never really join the wider Rebel Alliance is because there are actually a lot of former separatists amongst the ranks, and Saw Gerrera really hated separatists. You had rebel cells like Anton Krieger's Neo-Separatists who were in many ways still fighting the Clone Wars, and while many separatist holdouts like the one on Desix were destroyed by Imperial forces, many other hardened military units would remain mobile and strike at the Empire in any way possible. Now, these cells were made up of some pretty extreme people because you have to be pretty extreme to continue fighting when your entire nation gives up and, refuses to fight. Unlike the larger rebel movement, the Neo-Separatists were known for having very little patience. Having served in another war, they were very eager to see this one end, and so they were quite ruthless and also impulsive in their actions. Anton Krieger's entire unit would end up getting destroyed on Spellhouse. It'll be interesting to see more of these individuals, especially because Andor used to be a separatist himself. The Twilight people of Ryloth suffered greatly during the Clone Wars when separatist forces beneath the control of Wat Tambor occupied and pillaged the planet for resources and spice. Resistance leader Cham Syndulla, with the help of clone forces, beat back the Confederacy from their planet, but in the post-war period, it became very obvious that the Empire wasn't going to leave. Within months, Cham Syndulla was leading a new insurgency called the Free Ryloth Movement. Although Cham Syndulla liked to focus more on domestic issues, and the Free Ryloth Movement was obviously focused on Ryloth, there were some connections between their units and the wider Rebel Alliance. I believe there were some instances where they shared intel and even resources. General Hera Syndulla, the daughter of Cham Syndulla, would eventually leave the Free Ryloth movement and join the Spectre Cell during the operation to liberate Lothal. The likelihood of seeing Cham Syndulla and the Free Ryloth movement in Andor Season 2 might be, pretty low. That is, unless we actually go to Ryloth. The Cloud Riders were an interesting group. Officially speaking, they're considered marauders, or basically pirates that raid settlements more than they do ships. But this was just the front. The real reason why this organization was started was because the individuals making up this organization were all fleeing oppression from the Empire and the many criminal syndicates like the Crimson Dawn that supported it. Therefore, this group of marauders would often harass Imperial logistical networks and other soft targets in the Imperial military. Their goal was to ultimately raise funds so that they could fight the Empire. In one case, the group steals Imperial coaxium and gives it to Saw Gerrera's partisans. At the time, in 10 BBY, there really weren't many individuals fighting against the Empire like the partisans were. Not exactly sure what happens to the Cloud Riders after this. I wouldn't be surprised if they just got absorbed by another group like the Partisans. After all, Saw's right-hand man, Benthic Two Tubes, was originally a Cloud Rider, along with his brother, but they both joined up with the Partisans. It should also be noted that the Crimson Dawn is active during this time period, although under new management, thanks to the actions of Han Solo. We have Kiara now. Kiara, the new leader of the Crimson Dawn, had an ambitious plan to use the criminal underworld to create chaos in the Empire. She's a very dangerous individual, but her immediate goals do align with the Rebel Alliance somewhat. So it could be interesting to see if this criminal syndicate is going to be in Andor Season 2. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.